Hello, friends, family, and anyone who fancies the production of food. I've got a fabulous episode for the faithful followers of Feeder Flash on YouTube. Fasten your seatbelts for a fresh take on the frickin' cattle markets. But first, I want to say thanks to all my patrons and subscribers. Thank you for your support. It really means the world to me. If you aren't a patron or a subscriber, well, I guess that's on you. I could really use the support. I could also really use some more guests and topic suggestions. You can send me that feedback at redhillsrancher@gmail.com or use the contact form on my redhillsrancher.com website. My guest today is a longtime market analyst, content creator, and has a very loyal following on YouTube. Corbitt Wall hosts the popular Feeder Flash program on his YouTube channel, and he joined me on Zoom to take a deep dive into some of the things that he talks about, but I think some of us wish we could all understand just a little bit better. Here we go.
Whenever you're ready.
Hi, Corbett. Welcome back to Ranching Reboot. It's great to have you again, bud.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks.
Okay. Let's just jump right in. So you say often, you talk often about the market fundamentals.
Yes, I am a fundamental market analyst.
And I don't know if I was sick that day, but do they pull y'all aside at some point and say, here's the fundamentals, here's how it all works? And I get it's supply and demand economics, but can you explain it to me like I'm a golden retriever?
Yeah, exactly. You know, your fundamentals are the things that affect supply and demand, just basic nuts and bolts. You know, how many cattle are there? How many calves are there? How many cattle are on feed? How many cattle are market ready to slaughter? How much stocks we have of box beef frozen? You know, what our demand is like. Just your basic nuts and bolts. It would be probably opposite of what I call the technical market indicators, which are entirely just squiggly lines on a chart. The heck of it is our cattle industry has gotten to be a complete slave to the CME cattle futures. And most everybody that operates in those cattle futures have learned that the technicals are more reliant than the fundamentals, because they're all looking at the same charts and they're all reacting in the same way to the same chart. So it works for them.
Okay, what do you mean by the technicals?
Okay. So, you know, I studied this when I was in college, but I'm like you, I may have been gone some of those days, but, you know, they'll have gaps, in the charts, you know, where they're following the line of ups and downs. They'll have gaps. They'll have, some that they call hidden shoulders, where it makes a jump, goes up and then comes down, makes another jump that leaves like a figurehead and shoulders. And then they, you know, they of course take the lines and they match them up and draw them, and they see where there's uh, you know, like a threshold or a spot that if it falls below that, then it thinks it's lost its support. But it's just squiggly lines on a chart. But like I said, everybody that's trading commodities, your funds, your fund managers, they're all looking at the same charts. So if the chart is saying buy and everybody's looking at the chart, well, everybody buys, you know, the market's going to go up. And the same and on the downside. So, you know, yes, naturally those technical charts, the more people you got looking at them that are participating in futures, the more reliant they're going to be. The heck of it is, the guys that are out buying cattle, selling cattle, things like that, you know, they're not paying that much attention to the technicals. They just want to know, you know, how big is demand? You know, do we have holes to fill? Do we have empty pens that need filling? Are the pens all full? Do we not have anywhere to go with the cattle, and fundamental things like that?
And if you can find an empty pen, it's just a matter of finding an undervalued asset that you can put a reasonable cost of gain into, so you can make, you know, your few cents a pound.
Sure. And the margins are tight at all levels. So yeah, everybody's looking for any little indicator in there. But basically what I talk about on my feeder flash is the things that affect the market. How many cattle are moving, what the prices are. Sometimes I like to throw in some politics because it drives the liberals crazy. Just a lot of people say they like it because it's entertaining, and I said, well, it was supposed to be informative. But if I can give a little entertainment factor in there and it keeps people watching, then it keeps advertisers wanting to be involved, and it keeps us having the ability to put it out.
Yeah, and for those of you that don't watch Feeder Flash, it's on YouTube. It's great. Highly recommend it. If you're anywhere in a cattle business or in the beef trade, it's always great information. And
Thank you.
we do have a little bit of crossover. So
Sure.
I kind of pulled some of my friends and podcast fans over the last few days of what we should talk about. And so I just want to give these four gentlemen a shout out: Mr. Ross Sharts, Mr. Brendan Wheelock, Mr. Nate Hartz, and Mr. Tim Ohm. Thank you for all your feedback on how to have this conversation with Corbett. So we could have talked about the market and the fundamentals. And that's kind of really, where I want to dive into. And I'm not questioning you, sir. I'm not questioning you. I'm questioning whether the quote fundamentals that we've been used to don't necessarily apply anymore because of the technical aspect that you mentioned earlier, AI, machine learning algorithms, and their influence on, if they're not influencing cattle markets yet, they will. I think it's just a matter of time. And I think when that happens, we better grab onto our boots because it's going to be a really wild ride. Um, so do you think that the markets are still functioning like they should? I mean, there's also the short cow herd that, well, what are we? We need to retain a lot of heifers over the next few years in order to kind of correct the slide because it'll take 3 years to turn that around. So it doesn't seem like anybody's really worried about the shrinking cow herd right now.
No, well, the the big four packers, they've got packing plants in a lot of other countries too that aren't short of cattle, and I call it brush fed. They just have cattle there. They're running on rocks and cactus. They don't. A lot of those countries don't have that many commercial feedlots. They don't have show lists. That kind of thing. They come in there with helicopters and they gather up as many cattle as they can, and they slaughter 'em. And so it's more of a what we would consider more of a cow meat product, except we feed our cows really well here, so they have fat on them where a lot of the meat that we're getting, you always hear Australia and Brazil, but it's other places too. But places like that, there's a lot of that meat. It's pretty cheap. That they've got their grain fed high quality product too, but they've got a lot of this, like I say, brush fed type product. They can send it over here, and then we take the trim off of our obese steers and heifers that we're taking to these enormous weights, and even cows, the trim off that. We take that fat trim, throw it in the big hopper with them, and mix it all up, and it makes something palatable that our consumer is used to. And so that is taking place of a lot of what we need when we say we're short on cattle. I mean, yeah, our cow herd's the smallest it's been in 73 years, and what we've probably got 3 times more people living in this country or more. Yet we also take these cattle to weights that were never seen before, and also we're running them through the system so much faster than we've ever done before.
I, a lot of kind of different little rabbit holes to chase. And there was something about there was kind of a question about size that came up in my conversations with my friends and
Size matters.
in some of my research. Uh, I guess, the question is, how are the corporate feeders able to buy cattle at a $2 break even when fats are $1.85? Like, how does that make sense?
Are you talking about your corporate feeders or your corporate packers?
The question, it was corporate feeders.
Okay.
That was
So
that was
corporate
specifically what we were.
corporate feeders, they still have to have cattle. Like, okay, I'm understanding what he's looking at now because he's probably trying to fill pins of his own, or he's a farm feeder, or he's
Yeah,
retaining ownership or something like that.
Yep.
And you're like, gosh, these cattle just don't work. And then you look at your big corporate feeders, like your Cactuses, your Freona Industries, outfits like that. They've still got to keep their pins full too. And I remember Bob Foote, the late great Bob Foote, which he was a top 10 cattle feeder, and his boys are still. He told me, I've got 5 of these big feed yards. He said, it's just like hotels. He said, I can't operate them with empty rooms. So you've got to keep that going. They do it through risk management schemes. And as long as you're long cattle, then you can find brokers, commodity brokers, that can help you take that, minimize your risk, give you some open top side and limit your bottom side. And maybe you're making money, even though it appears that there's no way you can make money, but you might be making it on orange juice commodities or something like that. There's a lot of different risk management schemes that involves other commodities. And of course, if they're always long cash cattle, well, then that gives them something to pillar on, and then they can do these different schemes to limit their risk and open up the top side. And then they wait for the opportunities like we've had the last 2 or 3 years to make money. And you've got to make hay when the sun's shining, and that's they wait for those opportunities to do that.
Okay. So it's just a matter of playing the long game and taking
Yes,
cash out.
yes. You, there's some really really brilliant commodity people that can put in a lot of different, like I say, schemes. I'm not meaning that in a bad way, just meaning you would never dream that if you shorted this product and you could use it to head something else that's not even that product, but you actually can.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's kind of circle back to that initial statement that started it all.
Okay.
So the market. When we talk about the cattle market, what are we really talking about? What percentage of fat cattle ready for slaughter actually trade in the cash market?
About 20%
About 20%.
in a negotiated trade per week. Yeah.
So that 20% negotiated trade is what all the other secret handshake grids and formula pricing is determined on, that small 20% of the market that sells.
We could say there's exceptions, but yes, it eventually has to tie back to something.
I mean,
So
if
yeah,
if there's a nuance, we definitely can get into it, but we can just kind of talk in, overall general terms, like, yeah, that's basically how it works.
sure. Yeah.
Um,
We just see fewer and fewer and fewer cattle feeders that are willing to sell in the negotiated market each week because it really leaves them with their pants down. They're a slave to what the packer wants to give. And then you see the board fall out of bed like it's done a couple of times here recently. And all of a sudden your cattle are worth $3 or $4 or $5 a hundred less than they were yesterday. And it's a big shock. So all of your big corporate feeders have got a sweetheart deal with their pack. And so that they're on a formula type negotiation. And we say there's no negotiation to formulas. Normally those formulas will be negotiated once a year. And so that cattle feeder knows what kind of cattle that he typically feeds. He knows how he can make them perform. And he might have cattle that are plain, and they may still have a good yield grade. He may get more yield grade 2s than most everybody else. Well, he'll figure his formula where that's his premium, and he works more towards that maybe than quality grade, where most of your smaller feeders and farmer feeders get their premium.
And just for perspective, just for those out there that don't get it, like we're talking about feedlots that are 100,000 head capacity, 50 to 100,000 head capacity that get
And there's multiple ones. Yeah. For each enterprise has multiple feedlots. Yes.
So the guy with 1,000 head or 10,000 head, it's really, really difficult for him to be able to compete on any kind of a scale. And I get that, and when you think about it in the terms of those numbers, it makes more sense that, yeah, the way the system is, it could be seen as hurtful or taking less or taking a greater risk, taking your fats to the barn and trying to maybe get 2 bids on them.
Mhm.
Versus
there's barely any auction markets that you can sell finished fat cattle at. And there's none in the Southern Plains because no packer would support them. They don't want to create competition. That competition is their biggest enemy. Competition brings about higher prices. But luckily in the Northern Plains and in the Midwest, we've got some smaller regional type packers that don't always have all their needs filled, and they need to buy a few cattle on the spot market. And then you got your bigger packers that are afraid they're going to get something stolen, so they get in there and run it up on them. And that makes the wonderful thing about auctions. And so, the Stockman's Livestock Market in Yankton, South Dakota, is our biggest slaughter cattle auction, and they will have 2,000 to 3,000 fat cattle every week, and it's a good viable market there. There's several others. Watertown, South Dakota has a good one. Sioux Falls Regional Livestock and Worthing has a good one, and then you have several over in Iowa that don't run as many head, but they still get about the same price.
Okay. What's the sweetest deal you've ever heard of?
As far as
But between a feedlot and a packer, what's the sweetest deal you've ever heard of?
there's plenty of deals, especially down here. I say down here, I'm in the Amarillo area, so I'm in the Southern Plains. There's several feedlots down in the Texas Panhandle area that only feed Mexican cattle, and not the better Mexican cattle, the plainer Mexican cattle, the Oriente crosses, and the kind of like the difference between the Spanish goats and the Boer goats. The old kind. They sell
Money
they,
makers.
they only feed those, and they can get $2 to $4 over the negotiated market every week.
Okay.
That would be pretty sweet.
So where would that product go? I mean, and so many questions, but I don't even know what to ask because I feel so dumb. Like, why would they get such a good deal on Corriente half breeds? I mean,
Well,
I get
it-
Corriente half breeds feed really well.
You've got to remember that in commercial cattle feeding, there's really only one premium, and that is for volume and lots of it.
Okay.
So if you've got a big packing house, and let's say you're killing 6,500 a day, your biggest problem is making sure those needs are met. So you've got to have cattle, you've got to have them scheduled in, The truck's got to be rolling in the middle of the night to get them there for kill to start, and then they got to be rolling, just constantly all day. And so those big outfits that have a lot of cattle, they've got a lot of cattle ready, or on the show list or finished, and then that helps alleviate those problems for those packers. And then they've got the other guys that just have a few cattle here and there, and then they just kind of fill gaps with them as they need them. But the heck of it is, all of a sudden, all these cattle grade so well that quality is not that big of a deal anymore. Cattle are grading 75 to 80% choice or better. That's unbelievable. When I went into USDA and I was a livestock grader and graded delivery cattle for 15 years there and over, back in those days, cattle were grading 35 to 50% choice in the southern plains and 65 to 80% choice in the north. And now as a whole, they're grading 75 to 80% choice and better. And I get into big arguments with people about the reason for that. And they want to tell me that the genetics are better. I'll grant you the genetics are better. Cattle are better everywhere now than they were 20 years ago.
There's more to
They're
it than
gonna
that,
they're gonna
though.
say we're taking them to heavier weights, and I'll grant you that makes a lot of difference too, because they're when we're talking about quality grade, we're talking about the select choice prime, and so that makes a big difference. But I'm here to tell you it has a lot to do with the instrument grading that all the major plants have gone to, and that has evolved over the last 15 years or so, maybe to 20 years. But before that, we had graders, and I actually started out with USDA working for meat grading out of college. And I was never a meat grader. I was a livestock grader, but I did work in plants with the meat graders and knew what they did and followed it and knew the ins and outs of it. And you had a grader that was standing there and with a hammer. They called it a hammer, but it was actually a grading stick that had some weight to it, and they put ink on there, and then he would sling a grade on them up on their rump. Whether it was he would look at the degrees of marbling, and then if it was a choice, he would slap a choice on it, and then that ink would stay in there, and it would show that carcass was graded that. But it was hard, kind of repetitious type work, kind of like standing on an assembly line.
Yep.
And those guys' feet and ankles and knees got to hurt them, and they struggled with their elbows and shoulders and carpal tunnel and all that kind of thing. And so as technology got better, when they first started out, they had a team of the best USDA meat graders, and they went all around the country, and everyone would look at the carcass, which you rib those carcasses between the 12th and 13th rib, and you look at that ribeye, and you look right there, and you look at the marbling on it, and if the maturity is fairly young, basically it's just marbling. It's just specks of fat intramuscular within that ribeye, and that's your quality grade. So, everybody could look and put the degree of marbling that they thought that was, then they would average it together. So that would be the absolute grade for that carcass. And then they would take a picture of it, dial that in, say that's what that is. And they did this for weeks and weeks and weeks or months, traveling all over the country, looking at all kinds of different cattle. And then pretty soon the graders couldn't keep up with the camera. It got to where it was better than they were as a group even. And it didn't have a conscience. So if something, didn't make the grades, didn't hurt that camera's feelings. So he wasn't going to, move it up. And if one was about to be a prime, which back in the days when I was grading livestock, prime was a fluke of nature. About 3% of fed cattle made prime. Now it's way higher than that, because the cameras don't have any, conscience, any feelings about that either. So they just call them whatever they are. Because humans, you get human stuff involved, and everybody wants to stick to the averages all the time. So it's hard to move them from the averages. But also, I, I, I I'm pretty sure that those cameras get out of whack into the Packers' favor, and it takes a while to get them dialed back in.
Who
But
inspects those? Who makes sure that those are
Well,
your
meat grading supervision does that, but the visits are scheduled, and maybe once a quarter. And I've actually talked to meat grading supervisors that I used to work with that are very frustrated about that. And so, people can say, "Oh no, you don't know what you're talking about." I know because I talked to the guys that are responsible for it, and they're telling me that it's happened. But it's something that it's going to be hard to get anything done about, because the packer loves it. All these high grading practices. The cattle feeder loves it because it's cattle breeding more, and the consumer doesn't know. So we're going to abuse that consumer, uh, and as long as he keeps buying the steaks at a high price and the demand is up, nobody's going to complain about that. But and I will say, yeah, they're taking the cattle to heavier weights. That's going to make them have a better quality grade. The cattle are a little bit better. But I also know cattle feeders or farmer feeders or ranchers that retain ownership of their own cattle and have them fed, and the cattle haven't changed. They've still been using the same genetics for the last 20 years. And all of a sudden their cattle are grading 85% choice and better, where they used to grade 60. And the grades haven't changed.
The camera just doesn't lie or get
Yes.
tired or get
Yes.
complacent.
And you can make that camera do whatever you want to do with it.
Because it's run by software, which
Yes,
of course
exactly.
you can always go screw with that. Kind of
Exactly. It's just like, in the cattle futures, we used to have pits on Wacker Drive in Chicago, in the big office building there at CME, and you had traders, and they were buying and they were selling, and they would get orders off the phone from a broker in Kansas City, and they would go in there and they would make that happen, and then they would scribble it on a pad, and they'd have a runner, and he would take it over and they'd timestamp it and put it all in. And now computers do it all, and all they have to do is set up algorithms that can watch the movement of the trade. And if trade starts to go one way or the other, they'll just put little bitty orders in right ahead of it and just make tons of money, just within seconds.
My mom's brother was a trader on the CME. I forget what he traded. He's been gone for over 20 years. I should know. I don't.
That's one demerit.
Yeah, I'll take it. I was there on October 19th. I forget the year. I think 1986. They call it Black Monday.
Mm-hmm.
I was there in his office that morning when the world ended for the CME.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I remember the panic. And he was like,
we don't have time to mess with you right now.
You guys got to go.
Yeah.
So we kind of rescheduled the day hastily. And it's interesting how much influence they have. So back to cash trade and show list. So this 20% cash trade, where is that? And can you explain to me and kind of the audience what a show list is?
Okay, so if you're a commercial feedlot, you've got, this. I don't really consider 1,000 head feedlot that commercial. That's more like a farm feeder type of an outfit.
Let's put it in perspective. How many cattle trade a week?
Okay, so we typically now we will get less than 100,000 cattle selling on a cash basis every week.
And that's
We
only and that's
slaughter,
20%.
yeah, and
So
we
there's
slaughter
half a million.
around 500,000. So right in there, 20%. And we haven't been meeting the 20% on a regular basis. We've been falling less than that 100. And so it's been a little bit less than that.
So
But
the guy that's got 1,000 head feedlot is going to be selling 1,000 head, what, 3-4 times a year?
he will probably, if you have 1,000 head feedlot, you're probably going to sell 2 or 3 loads a month. So a load is roughly 40 head. So he's going to be marketing that, turning those over. Hey, you've got a big feed yard, like they have around Amarillo here, where 60, 80,000 head is nothing. They're going to have hundreds of loads sell every week, but most of those are going to be formula.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to maintain perspective on like what 1,000 head feedlot does on a yearly basis versus the size of the weekly market.
Mm-hmm. So your cattle we used to say that we fed cattle for 120 days, but now you don't hardly ever see anybody that feeds cattle for less than 150 days. So, like you said, you can turn those cattle over, a couple of times there, in a year's time, a little more than that, between 2 and 3.
Okay. So back to this elusive cash trade market. Where is that?
Most of it is in Iowa because that's where you have most of the farmer feeders. So you don't have a lot of big commercial feedlots in Iowa. So you have a whole lot of smaller feedlots. And so they're basically setting our market every week, which they have the best cattle in the world. Right there. They feed them the best. They feed them the hardest or the highest concentrate of corn. And so they're the ones that make our market, and they have the best cattle. The only problem is with that, they're the least armed to do that because a lot of them only have cattle ready a few times a year. And so their relationship with their packer buyer is not as close as the guy that's, selling, thousands and thousands every week. So that is advantage pack. And almost everything within the fundamental markets as a negotiated trade is advantage pack. But you do have a few cooperative marketing outfits. The Iowa Cattlemen's Association have a cooperative marketing marketer. His name is Mike Schwartz. He's a friend of mine. He will take members of the Iowa Cattlemen's Association that want to be in that cooperative, and he will go around and find out what cattle that they have as a group, and it gives him more leverage in the trade every week. And then he's dealing with those packers every week, so he can usually make a better deal than the guy that, I think these are ready, but I'm not sure. Kind of guy. But a show list is a list of cattle that the feedlot believes are market ready. So they're ready to go. And he may get rid of all that list when he decides to market it, or, the packer might come in there and look over that list and scratch 2 or 3 pins out and say, we don't think those are ready, or we don't want them, but we do want these. And used to, I'm saying 20 years and before that ago, that's what your packer buyers did, was they got out and drove feedlots and drove feed alleys and looked at cattle. And those guys were well educated and grading cattle on the hoof. Nowadays, not so much. They would really rather have the facts, the closeout from the packer or from the feed yard. What these cattle weigh coming in, how much have they been eating, how many days have they been on feed. And most of your packer buyers today would rather have that information than to look at them.
Because they can put that into a spreadsheet and it can.
Well, and they know, if cattle have been on feed for 150 days and they weighed 9 coming in, they got some weight to them. They've had plenty of grain. They should be ready to go. unless they're a real framey breed type that, tends to grow more before it starts to finish out.
Okay. Okay. And that makes a little bit of sense.
Mhm.
So how much do you trust the accuracy of the USDA cattle data? I mean, with respect to every other government report getting revised, like,
Yeah. Um, well, I was a USDA market reporter for 18 years. I trust the information that we report or that we reported and they report now. You know, what year was that? Around 99, 2000, they come up with mandatory price reporting, MPR. And that's where all of our finished cattle, slaughter cattle, steer and heifer kind of data, that's where all that comes from now. Because they thought previous to that, at that time we were reporting a lot more sales. We were probably reporting 300 some thousand sales. And they were pretty much everybody would turn them in at the same price. And they're like, that's ridiculous. They're not selling that many cattle at 185. There's got to be some differences in there. And so they spent all this money, moved personnel around, got this big computer server, got this data system where the packers actually turn the information in. So they go in and fill the cells with all the information, and then they send it to USDA Market News twice a day at 10 and 2 every day. Supposedly everything that they purchased since the last time that they reported. So they get all that information. And whenever they got all done, they figured out that those cattle were bringing 184.96 instead of 185.
185.
It's And then we thought we were going to get all this great information about, what are these formula cattle actually bringing and all this kind of stuff. And most of it they can't report due to confidentiality rules because you can't, you know, pull somebody's pants down, say, hey, look, and so that left that you couldn't leave anybody out where they would stick out. And so you had to make sure that there was several different trades to cover up any one individual. And so there's different rules on that, but the confidentiality covered up a lot of what we wanted to see. And then they had to put, for the premiums and discounts on the formula deals, they had to make those ranges so wide that you really can't tell heads or tails from. So that, so we're still looking at the negotiated trade that just continues to dwindle and dwindle and dwindle. But, a few years ago, we were really pushing a bill, Cattle Price Discovery and Transparency Act. I don't know if you remember about that.
Yes, sir.
We were pushing that bill, and I say I was working with U.S. Cattlemen's Association to push that bill, and we were going to force a mandatory minimum of negotiated trade within different regions to try to preserve that trade. Because if you look at the hogs used to have trade, and then there's no cash trade of hogs. And it's just, nobody really knows what the hog market is. And nobody really gives a shit because nobody raises hogs anymore. It's all done in these hog factories, which are owned by the same guys that are killing them, and the same guys that are making the feed to feed them. So they just took that industry away from us. Said that's no longer a viable way to make money, as in the hog business, unless you've got some kind of a niche market. But we really thought, and we did have a good chance. Chuck Grassley has been trying to get some type of a trade, mandatory minimum on a trade, for years, for 20 or 30 years, because his constituents are farmer feeders in Iowa. So he's been trying to get that. We had several senators sign on, and we were pretty sure we could get it through the Senate, but the House of Representatives was a different animal, and we didn't think we could get it through there. And NCBA was fighting is tooth and nail with their lobbyists that are paid with checkoff dollars on the, in DC, and they were fighting it tooth and nail, and they had more arrows in their quiver than what we did, and finally they just prolonged it until they finally won out, and it's still there, but we don't have anybody to really push it right now. So eventually your fat cattle trade will dry up to nothing, and then everybody's going to be pretty well lost on what a fat steer's worth.
Which I keep wanting. I'm having a hard time getting away from this subject. So when we're talking about what sets the price on a grid and formula, you said it was trade in Iowa.
Mhm.
Is any of that disclosed?
Well, that's the cash trade. That's the live trade starts in, which is they may be getting 189 for fat cattle live. They may be getting close to $3 dressed. That's the trade that they start. So the grid stuff, the packers pretty much set that up kind of based loosely off of box beef cutout values. Then they set it to where they can afford to buy cattle, and they like to buy cattle that way. And that's basically what your formulas are. But when you get these big feeding outfits, they can tweak those formulas a jillion different ways. I've heard people tell me, there's lots of things included those big corporate formulas up to and including Big 12 football school.
How hard is it to get a look inside of some of those?
And be impossible. And then
You think you think even half of them are written down?
They might just be in a computer program somewhere, at the plant. But I assume that they're written down somewhere. Whenever we were trying to get the Cattle Price Discovery and Transparency Act done, of course, all of your big corporate feeders were against it because they like their sweetheart. Hey, I got a sweetheart deal with Tyson. I love them. They take the cattle when I say they're ready. And then it works for me because I feed shit cattle, but I can make them yield really well or whatever. And so that's the way that works. But they were totally against it. Your big feeders were, because they didn't want to have to sell a portion of their cattle in a negotiated cash manner. And then of course your packers didn't want to have to buy any cattle in a negotiated manner. There are some big packing houses scattered around in the Five-Area feeding region that don't buy any cattle in a negotiated cash form. So they didn't have a fat cattle buyer. They didn't have a procurement office. They didn't have nothing. Well, they didn't want to do it, of course. And then that bill would have forced them to do it. It wouldn't have forced cattle feeders to sell their cattle that way. It would have forced packers to purchase a minimum percentage of their buy each week in a negotiated form. And they didn't want to do it. And so they told NCBA, hey, we're giving you guys lots of money here. Beat this. And they did.
Well, that's what they pay. What's that kid's name? Ethan?
Yeah, Ethan Lane.
That's what they pay Ethan so much money to do.
He's good at it.
Yep.
And Ethan's not a bad guy. I mean, he gets his instructions just like you and I get ours. He's just really good at his job.
Some of my problem is I don't have somebody giving me marching instructions. I work for a madman, which is myself.
Yes.
Um,
No, what's sad about NCBA, and I'm a big NCBA critic, is NCBA is made up of affiliates all over the United States, Missouri Department of Agriculture, Iowa Cattlemen's, Kansas Livestock Association, Texas Cattle Feeders, Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers. They've got all these groups, and they're getting the membership from small producers And then whenever it gets all collected up in the big pot and you got your NCBA top level, they normally don't protect or work for small producers. It's usually what the big dogs do. And they're the ones that's got whoever has the gold makes the rules, right? Right.
Right. And to be fair, okay, how many cattle is Five Rivers trading every week
Yeah.
versus how many am I trading every year?
And
What's
most
my contribution to the checkoff versus theirs?
exactly. But the lion's share of your membership dues into these groups is done by these small cow calf producers that don't feed cattle themselves. And they are getting pushed out of the industry in droves.
Is okay. That I think that's a great point. And
That is supposed to be our segue to talk about mandatory electronic ID.
can I love it. I mean, it's like we're headed that direction.
Great.
Well, let's go. We'll circle back if we need to.
Okay.
I I'm I think EID tags. Now I'm on the fence. I don't want it to be mandatory. Okay. I think
That's
great for
yeah.
record keeping. I think they're great for record keeping for the cow calf guy. I can match calves with cows, keep digital records.
Well, especially these guys that are in these niche markets and they're using premium genetics and they're selling a premium quality product
I know a
and it's
guy that's
purebred, all that stuff. Yeah, that's a wonderful way to keep records, and that's great for them. And right now, a lot of those outfits will get premiums for the record keeping, the data, and the EID tag. But if we make it mandatory, no more premium because everybody will have to do.
I yes and no. So some of the guys that I know that are getting premium that are using, electronic ID and full tracking from basically from as my friend Dustin would put it, from sperm to steak, having
Okay.
traceability and transparency in that entire process and being able to track that animal. Like, imagine this, you're sitting in a steakhouse, they give you a steak menu with QR codes by it. So you
Yeah.
can be like, I want a sirloin from this cow. You can scan that code and it
You got a
tells you
little video of the farm it come from.
video of the farm, pictures of the cow,
Yeah.
weight records, vaccination records, et cetera, et cetera. All
I
the
think that's awesome. And I love that. And I hope that continues to grow because that's going to endear us to our consumer that 30 years ago, that consumer had an uncle that had a farm, but in the last 30 years, they can't tell you what animal a hamburger comes from versus a piece of bacon. So yeah, that will endear us to our consumer. And I think those are great, great projects. And I think that's great. I'm all about record keeping and ID also, but not the mandatory.
because if there's mandatory, there's going to be reporting. I mean, there's the argument is we can't let them start regulating this because once they get their foot in the door, once they get
Mhm.
that camel nose under the tent flap,
It's gone. It's gone. Yeah.
you don't.
We already know that USDA, the APHIS plan for this is to have it from birth to slaughter. Now, the big ruckus right now is mandatory on breeding stock or mature cattle that are still breedable over 18 months, which is basically our cow herd.
Which punishes the cow calf guy.
Sure. And
And
that's not that big a deal. Honestly, I don't, we're really worried that much about that. But just like you said, if we give them that in another 6 months or a year, they're going to come back with all classes, which NCBA almost made a policy for all classes at their last convention, but word got out what they were trying to do and they were going to just slip it under the rug. And then people in major league people, big swingers with big sticks, come out and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Hey, this is too much.
But if it's just mature breeding stock,
Mhm.
doesn't that just defeat the purpose? I thought the whole reason they're one of the whole pillars they were selling this on was in case we get a disease outbreak or we need to
Well,
trace.
that's what they're selling it on. So
So
that if anybody pushes back on it, they're saying, "What, you don't think we should have disease traceability?" This doesn't do anything more for disease traceability than what we're doing right now.
so the
Other
packers
than,
and feeders are exempt.
well, yeah, because it's going to benefit them, of course, because it's already going to be done and handed to them on a silver platter. But they don't have to do the work, and they don't have to put up, and they don't have to worry whenever they've got 500 cows turned out, you know, several hundred miles from where they live. And then you've got some, you know, Green New Deal guy over there with a droid, or up there flying around and scanning all those cattle, and then sending him a bill for carbon credits.
I mean, I understand your concern. The scenario is
Now,
a little bit far from
surely you don't doubt that something like that could happen.
I can understand the concern. Like I
Or
said,
over in Europe, there's countries over there where they've used that information on the mandatory ID to track exactly how many you have, and then they send you a bill for $100 a head for destroying the globe. If you sent somebody a bill for $100 a head, I mean, in a fantastic year in 2024, a lot of people were lucky to get $100 a head profit. Even though it was all-time record highs. In another country in Europe, they decided they needed, once they found out exactly how many they had, then they decided that they needed to slaughter over 40,000 head to stay under their burps and farts that are killing the ozone.
meanwhile, they're going to pave over some more forest and
Yeah,
marshland to build a couple more filing cabinets for people.
yeah, yeah. Put solar panels up all over. Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, we'll bulldoze some more farmland and put solar panels up. Like,
Right.
I'm all for solar. Makes sense for a lot of scenarios. I pump a lot of livestock water with solar panels. I have solar panels on my house. It does not make a damn bit of sense to plow up arable farmland or anything else that could be growing grass or trees and put solar panels there. We have millions and millions of square foot of roof.
Yes.
Walmarts. I mean, every big box distribution center, every apartment complex should have solar panels on the roof. That would make sense.
We just need to wait for technology to catch up. I mean, with this administration that I hope to God we get out of there, the Magoo administration, well, that was what I call it, Mr. Magoo, and Kamala Harris. They they've got this, they want to get rid of all the internal combustion engines, by, I think at one time it was 2030, but maybe as it gets closer, maybe 2050. But, I think it'd be great if they worked, but they don't. Eventually, we're going to have technology that will make that a doable thing, but we don't right now. So why try to push it? I mean, I'm still amazed by these cell phones that we listen to. And if they worked, they would be awesome. But you get out in the country somewhere and you can't hear people. Oh, it said if these damn cell phones work, we'd be like George Jetson, going around talking on the phone all the time. But they don't work that great.
I switched from AT&T back to Verizon, and now I don't have any trouble. Even when I was
Really?
down to your part of the woods a couple weeks ago. I said woods, like
Yeah, we have
down in your part of the mesquite trees.
got a pretty girl behind every tree. Yeah.
When I came down there for the fire summit a couple weeks ago, it was my first time being in that part of the world. I mean, I've gone through the Panhandle on 54, been other places in Texas, but never been like to the Amarillo area. it's kind of strange because you get down south towards Canyon, you look off to the west and you can watch your dog run away for about 2 weeks.
Mhm.
It's just like it just goes. I
Right.
say Kansas is flat. I've been a lot of places in Kansas. I've never seen anywhere that damn.
That flat. Yeah.
But then you go like 30 feet east of town, and the world just ends
Yeah.
at the canyon. I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah. That's awesome. And then if you go north, you get into some pretty rugged country, like you said, with a lot of mesquites and the, not big mesas, but there's some really rough kind of old west kind of country there up through Delhart and places like that.
I went home up through Fritch, Borger, and Stinnett, and
Mhm.
then up north because I wanted to see that area because one of the speakers at the fire summit was Archie Cross, who's the wildland chief for Borger, Texas.
Okay.
And he talked about how he developed his wildfire protection plan and implemented it for the town and made the town a more fire-wise community. And it's how they survived Windy Deuce. And he kind of walked through that. And I wanted to see it. So I went up there and I got to experience, that part of the world. But when I came down, I dropped down through Kansas down to Woodward, Oklahoma, and then I cut over, I think it's 60 or 64 through Canadian, then just right down to Amarillo.
Mhm.
And the whole north side of that for almost 100 miles was all Smokehouse Creek fire. And
Yeah. Yeah. Canadian got the worst of it. It's terrible.
yeah, it was bad. I have a good friend from Canadian who lost literally all of his cattle. And right after that fire went through, he had a medical issue with a family member, and he's been dealing with that pretty much ever since. I'm hoping to get him on the podcast soon.
Poor
TM.
fellow. Yeah. At the beef expo that they have at Canadian there every year, I went this last time, and there was a woman there, a young woman that had a family, and I didn't know her, but we met and we were visiting, and some of the other guys that were around knew her, and they started asking her about that day, and she started talking, and there was about 5 of us grown men and her, and we were all hugging and bawling.
It
By the time
was
she got done telling that story, I mean, it was just horrible.
it was, honestly, okay, so the fire that burned my ranch was in 2016. And not to take anything away from people that lived through Smokehouse Creek and had their houses burn up. I just watched the ranch burn and I didn't lose any livestock.
Helpless, yeah, but
But
still.
but still, like the emotional scars of that day and seeing like the whole world on fire and the sky being black, it stays with you. And I could probably talk about, those series of days in depth now without getting emotional.
Mhm.
It was 8 years ago. These people just went through this shit
Oh, yeah.
February.
When they're telling you about
The
pulling a
scars are gonna
good
be deep, but just let me finish real quick. What I saw when I drove through, I saw a lot of dead trees. I saw a lot of really, really beautiful rangeland that had recovered awesome. Like, you know, you guys had finally had some moisture, had some growing season. There was a lot of really nice grass. There was some that was kind of abused and not well managed, but there was a lot that looked really good. And I think long term, what I wish people in that area would see is fire is a necessary part of the landscape, and it's also a renewal effect on the landscape. And
but having a fire in that part of the country versus burning off a pasture in Flint Hills in Kansas is 2 different things. And there's some cover up there around Canadian, but a lot of those ranchers tell me when you get into it, it's careless weeds and things like that don't have any feed value. And they said, but there is new grass coming but they said for that to really root down and be okay again, they're going to have to not graze it for at least 2 years. Well, that is a huge cost, that nobody's really thinking.
And yes, and I think that a lot of people will be surprised at how many of those pastures come back next year, or when they go out and do, start doing end of season inventories at the end of the growing season. Like, that's when I do a lot of mine, is because if you know how many pounds of cattle you had in a pasture, you know roughly how much grass they're eating every day. You know how big your pasture is. You measure everything at the end of the season. It's just math after that point. I think I think people might be surprised when they go out and look at their pastures at the end of the season on what's really there. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if some of the people have said it might be 2 years. They'll go ahead and turn out cattle next year.
Mm.
That being said, I've also seen, like, this guy's just down the road from me. Of course, it's a neighbor. It's always a neighbor we're talking about. Um, I've seen what happens when you turn out too many cattle after a burn or after a
Oh,
fire,
you
and it's
you'll
not
ruin
right.
it. Yeah.
I've definitely seen that. And, your point about, burn a pasture in Flint Hills isn't necessarily comparable to a wildfire that's burning in front of 60-mile-an-hour winds. And I
Mhm.
totally get that. I mean,
Yeah. Rough, sandy ground that doesn't have a whole lot of seed in it yet.
yep.
And the grass is no quick growing grass, like the tall grass areas up there. You can, in the Flint Hills, you can have a fire one day and turn cattle out the next. I mean, they might have black noses, but that's what they really love, is that fresh, tender stuff that's coming up, right under that. But you, you wouldn't be able to turn, like we said, couldn't turn cattle out for 2 years in that short grass country, because it just wouldn't be anything there to eat.
Yeah. Yeah. It's rough, but like I said, I think long term, I hope people will see it as a good thing, because
Yeah, nothing. And like I was telling you about that girl, she was telling us, you know, that's what got us so emotional. She was loading horses that her families had for years and years, and her little girl learned to ride one and all that, loading those horses in a trailer, trying to get out of there. Rubber floor on the trailer is literally melting while she's trying to drive them out of there. It's just, and then they had an aluminum trailer, and the sides are warped from the heat, trying to get their horses out of there. It's just unbelievable.
yeah. Let's move on to a lighter subject.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Uh, so oh, I'm pretty sure I know where you stand about what's going down in the country for November, and you're hopeful for a Trump Vance presidency.
I'm
I
praying for it. Yes.
I think, you know, myself as a lifelong libertarian, I definitely think that Trump is better suited to be the next president rather than Kamala Harris. I don't have any faith at all in her ability to do anything.
Right. Right.
Like,
Montel Williams and Willie Brown, they said she's got some skills.
I didn't want to be crass or crude, sir.
I'll do that for you.
So I mean, there's that. It's deeply disturbing. Like, it's deeply disturbing. And I guess I heard last night that RFK is going to announce tomorrow, which will be last Friday for those of you listening to the podcast, which comes out Monday, if you followed all that. I think it sounds like RFK is going to quit and endorse Trump, which
I think that could be a big deal. I really do. Because I think a lot of Democrats that are, especially are in agriculture and in farming and things like that, and once in a while, they'll let their guard down, and we find out, or I find out, and I'm like, you're kidding me. Well, they're old Kennedy Democrats. And my grandfather was, both of them actually were old Kennedy Democrats. And then they loved, uh, you know, the RFK, and they loved that whole family back in those days. That is a totally different Democrat than what we have today. That's, wanting boys to play in girls sports, and putting tampons in little boys' bathrooms and all of this green stuff that's going on. That's a different animal. And I think we could glean some of those Kennedy Democrats over to our side if we actually got a Kennedy to come over.
I, and I hadn't thought of that, and I think that's a really great point.
Mhm.
I don't living where I live, growing up where I've grown up, being here my whole life. Like I have a tendency to think of generally farmers and ranchers as Republican blue supporters, and when I hear somebody that is in agriculture that's on the other side of the aisle, I get a little confused. I'm like, hold up. That doesn't necessarily make sense.
Mhm.
But the comment about Kennedy and Democrats, I can kind of see that. And I think RFK could do a lot worse things for the next 4 years than drop out of the presidential race right now, endorse Trump, and probably get a nice sweet job on the cabinet or in the administration for 4 years.
Yeah, and then I know that's what he's wanting. That's not really Trump's style to let somebody, get him over a barrel like that. Because that's the greatest thing about Trump is he doesn't owe any favors and he doesn't owe anybody anything. Most of our politicians, by the time they get that high, their list of IOUs is so long that's basically all they get done is paying people back for all these ear notch things and deals that they won't do. And Trump really doesn't have to do anything but what he wants to do when he gets in there. And I don't think Trump, I think, I'm just thinking here. I think Trump would have rather RFK come to him and said, "Hey, I want to do this, if you could help me out or let me be involved in the administration somewhere, that would be great." Instead, he comes on Fox News and says, yeah, I want to be Health and Human Services secretary. You want me to sign with you or with Kamal? And that I don't think that was the way Trump would have preferred it, but he might still do it because he's polling 3 to 5% in a lot of areas, and 3 to 5% is huge.
Yes. And which kind of brings me to a point, like you're voting for Trump because you want to support Trump and support his agenda. And I think what's clear to me that's happened on the news in the last 30, 45 days since since the debates, it became clear that Biden wasn't in his mind and he decided not to run again. Kamala Harris, the last time she was put to a vote by the American people in the Democrat primary 4 years ago, she didn't even get 5%.
She had to drop out, remember?
She didn't even get 5%. Okay. Still, somehow, like, and I honestly think she's a comedy DEI pick for vice president because they knew that they could just stash her somewhere, make her go away, and she never had to do anything or say anything. And that's what the story was for 3.5 years. We didn't hear a peep out of Kamala Harris. She's the border czar. What's she doing about it? Oh, don't worry about it. Trump said something bad. Trump's a felon. Don't worry about what Kamala Harris is doing. Trump's a felon.
Right.
And now we've got Biden saying, I'm going to pull out of the race. Okay. The Biden Harris campaign was already sitting on something like 80 or $90 million. So if there's not a candidate named Harris to spend that money just goes away.
Yeah, it has to be refunded, I think. Yeah.
So they're already sitting on $90 million. There ain't no way in hell they're giving that back. So she had to run.
Yeah.
She had to run. And the first polls after Biden pulls out had her at less than 10% and Trump at like 60, 70. Granted, that was also after the assassination attempt, which we could talk about. We could talk about that too, if you want, because I think that's a bunch of bullshit.
Right.
It's almost like all this support for her just magically appears overnight. Nobody cares about her platform. Like, she is such an extreme left socialist. It scares the shit out of me.
Whoa.
And there are
What's-
people pouring money at her. And I think here's the message I get, Corbett. There's two names on the ticket. There's Donald Trump and there's somebody not Trump. It doesn't matter who it is. You're voting against. Like, that's how the Democrats are selling this. You got to vote for Harris or Trump's going to get another 4 years and he's literally going to be Hitler. I'm sorry, that's not an argument. He had 4 years to do it already.
Yeah, he wasn't like that at all at that point. And 6 weeks ago, she was polled as the least popular vice president in history. And, they just had the Democratic convention, and you got Oprah and you got Bill Clinton and you got Hillary and you got both the Obamas just up there just screaming joy, oh, this is just so wonderful. And they're just anointing her this big position that she's not qualified for at all. And that is Biden's fault, because it came out whenever he became evident that 4 years ago that he was going to be the Democratic nominee. He come out and said, I don't know who my running mate's going to be, but she's going to be black and it's going to be a woman. That made the pool pretty shallow. So
comedy DEI hire.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
That comment that he made before he picked her, the fact that he picked her and stashed her for 3.5 years, there's no other explanation.
And you and I both know DEI stands for didn't earn it.
Okay. It's really diversity.
I can't remember.
Inclusivity.
Mm-hmm.
I'll probably get hate mail for not knowing what that was. redhillsrancher@gmail.com.
As long as you're getting some mail. Yeah.
I mean, I don't mind the haters, because at least they pay attention to everything I do and I get to live in
They're watching because they want to hate the next thing.
Yeah.
We got him on the feeder flash too, Paulie,
Just the guys that are there to argue with you all the time. I love you. Love you. Don't go anywhere. You're beautiful. So what's your long range forecast for the cattle markets and rebuilding the cattle herd if we have 4 years of Trump or if we have 4 years of Harris?
Well, and I've had fools that have put comments on my YouTube channel saying that, well, I like Biden. He's been good for the cattle market. Cattle markets run in roughly a 10-year cycle, and they go up and they go down. And that's your fundamental supply and demand, and that's your numbers. Yeah. Biden happened to be in when we had the tightest numbers in 73 years. Well, good for him, but he's going to get some good cattle markets, not that he cares or knows anything about it. But I think that, or I know that Trump would improve our economy so much. We're getting, and that's probably our biggest fear as cattle people, is getting our product so expensive that a regular family can't have it on a regular basis on their table. And when we price ourselves out of the market like that, then we're sunk. We got to stay viable. So this inflation has gotten so high that we're getting to that point now. People can't afford it. And I don't say, low income people or whatever, I go to the grocery store like everybody else, Do I want to have one big old ribeye that looks pretty good? Or do I want a heaping pile of pork chops or a giant platter of chicken? And we've got to do that. When people say, oh, some people say, oh, we just want them higher. No, we've got to improve the economy. We've got to get our inputs down. We've got to get interest down. The interest here of late's been over $100 a head, just interest on finishing out a fat steer. That we can't go on like that. And so Trump will improve the economy. He'll get these input prices down. Fuel's a big input especially for farmers, and he will get the interest under control where we can compete again. So I think that is going to help. Whether the market's fixing to fall on its face. I mean, we can't help that. I mean, we're at the end of the cycle. You know, we've had fireworks and everything. You know, we've had the highest prices quoted on every single class of cattle that there is within the last 3 months. You know, the highest calves, the highest yearlings, highest fats, highest everything. But it's getting ready to fall. It's time for it to fall. You know, that's one thing. Some people criticize me because I'm not totally in love with mandatory country of origin labeling, because, you know, they said, well, they took cool away from us in 2015, and that's why the market fell. The market fell because the market was really high and it had a hell of a long ways to fall. That's going to happen in 2025. It just is. You know, guys have to protect themselves with LRPs and other ways to protect themselves on the downside. They've got to learn to operate in a down market. I don't think the market's going to go as far down as where it did last cycle. And I don't think that our numbers are going to build back near as big as what they have in past cycles, because we've got fewer places to turn cattle out all the time. Every year we get more bushels to the acre, but we never get any more or any less acres to the cow, because, you know, you just
That's a
can't
great
do it.
point. That's a
And
great
there's fewer and fewer and fewer places to turn cattle out all the time. Urban sprawl is sopping up a lot of places to turn cattle out. This wildlife and hunting stuff is taking a ton of it out. I mean, these hunting clubs are going in into Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and buying huge working cattle ranches and taking them out of production. And
And
so
driving
there's
up
just
the local property taxes. Oh yeah,
absolutely
seen
don't
it.
trade local. You know, yeah.
Got one
Uh,
road.
that frustrates me. You know, it's just been so long since people have been hungry. If people were to get hungry, they would start paying a lot more attention to people like you and I, because you know, they would learn where, you know, it happened a little bit during COVID. People, you know, you've heard the stories about the woman going into the grocery store and yelling at the butcher because there's no ground beef out there. And she says, "Where's it at?" And he says, "I'm out." She says, "Well, get back in there and make some more."
That's
You know,
not how it works, lady.
she doesn't understand. A lot of people started to learn a little more about where their food comes from during COVID. Now, it was too bad that we had to go through COVID to get that. But sometimes I almost think it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if we didn't get hungry for a little bit, so people would start paying more attention to production agriculture. And, you know, yeah, those cows might be burping and farting out there, but we need that protein. And also how much cattle grazing does to help alleviate like wildfires and different things like that. You know, you gotta graze it. You know, um,
Graze it, log it, or watch it burn.
great. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was wanting to say. Graze it, log it, or watch it burn. I remember several years ago in California, Ronald Reagan's library sits in a beautiful spot, and they had all this woods and undergrowth and things under it behind, and it was beautiful there. And there was a fire coming, and it was going to take out the Ronald Reagan Library. And finally, somebody with a brain in their head ordered like 500 goats, and they turned them out there. You know, within a couple of days, there was no fuel there anymore, so everything was good. You know, and I think people need to learn more about that and more. You know, this is the way it's supposed to have been. There was more buffalo roaming these ranges before we were here than there are cattle now. And I don't, and those buffaloes, they burp and fart too. I mean, maybe even worse than the cattle.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Couple more questions. How do we get the big yards to do cash trade and to get away from their sweetheart backyard, backroom grids and formula deals?
Well, I don't think you could now unless we had legislation like what we tried to get done to make them trade or make the packers buy a small percentage of their cattle in a negotiated manner. Unless the packers couldn't do it or wouldn't do it, you're not going to get them away from it because, I know all those guys. I had one guy that runs a corporate feeding outfit, and he says, I'll do whatever you want me to do, but I'm not showing you my sweet. He said, I've been working for years to get my sweet do, and my cattle hardly ever lose money because I've got that thing dialed in and it works exactly for the way that I operate that feed. And we never wanted them to have to not have those deals, those sweetheart deals. We just wanted to make a viable cash market that something could snub up to,
If you could guarantee confidentiality, do you think some of those guys would disclose their deals? And not necessarily to you. I'm just saying, like, if there was a totally confidential system, do you think those guys would disclose their deals so they could be aggregated?
No, I think it'd be just like that guy I was talking to. He says, I'm not showing my deal to nobody. And why would they uncover it? You talk about confidentiality. Somebody's going to see it, that for some reason or another. But we're going to get to the point where we don't have any another term, price transparency. If we don't know what a fat steer's worth, and right now, what a fat steer's worth is what negotiated trade will derive at. But if we get to the point where we don't know what one's worth, where's our industry going to go then? And it's just like what's a fat hog? Finished hog?
I don't know. Like, we actually bought one. We have a friend that raises pastured pigs.
You either got a really good deal on it or you really got screwed. One or the other.
You know what? I got really tasty pork. I got really tasty pork. I know where it came from. I know where the feed that it was fed came from. And I know it didn't have any junk, like any antibiotics or any crap in it. I know it was.
And you were willing to pay a premium for that, weren't you?
I mean, like, compared to what bacon cost in the store, yeah, I paid more. How much more? I don't know. I mean,
you're happy with it, so what difference does it make?
Yeah, I mean, you can't buy that product in the store, so what difference does it make? I can't buy that taste, in a store, so it doesn't matter how much, because it's not a comparable product. It's like saying a car is a car, right? It's like saying a car is a car. Well,
no, what kind of car?
Yeah, what kind of car? I might drive a Yugo, you might drive a Mercedes. Is a car a car? Well, some ways, yes. Is a pig? Yes, but they're different.
Right.
They're vastly
and I think, a while ago I said that I wasn't big on mandatory cool, and I'm not. I'm really not that big on anything mandatory, although I did think that we needed to make it mandatory if we were going to get the packers to purchase anything in a negotiated manner, and it didn't happen. So, but we do need the truth in labeling, because I really don't want that brush-fed crap that they are putting in the hopper with hundreds of trimmings off of hundreds or thousands of other cattle and mixing it all together.
Okay.
I would rather not have that.
This is a great.
But I can't tell the difference in the store.
This is a great place to start. I'm going to give you a magic wand.
Okay.
And dare to dream big, sir. Please do. And tell me how you would fix it. Fix it all. Fix the cattle markets. Fix the competition.
I would pass the Cattle Price Discovery and Transparency Act. I would force packers to participate in negotiated trade at the level that it happens within their area. I mean, they're totally exploiting those weighted averages. They should have to participate in the trade that establishes them, which is not too much to ask. I mean, we weren't asking much. I mean, all we wanted was like 10% in Texas, of negotiated trade. And they were just like, oh my God, you make me have to negotiate on 10% of what I buy for this plant every week. That's ridiculous. If we would have got that done, what it would have done, and I had several sale barn owners all across the country that were just waiting, because that would be one way to fulfill that negotiated trade, was if they bought some fat cattle through an auction. So we had several auctions that were slated to start, because you can't get them to participate now. Why would they? They don't want competition. But rather than them trying to figure out a way to negotiate more trade, they could go into an auction, buy just what they needed to cover themselves for that week, and then they would be good. I think that would cause more trade, more competition. It would bring the market up to where it should be. Not always higher, but just a fair market price. If we get rid of, we keep building these things to eliminate competition. Competition is the only way you can trade in. I don't want to be involved in any kind of trade that doesn't have competition. Which I talk about what a fat steer's worth, which is sometimes hard to gather, but what's a 800-pound steer worth, Well, I got a screen right there that tells me exactly what they're worth, because it's where they sold in sale barns, today and yesterday and 5 minutes ago. And we know what that's worth because we got competition. And selling things at auction, putting them in front of people and letting them bid on them till they don't want them anymore. That's been going on for centuries, and it's the best way to do this. I wish we did more of it that way, but I can see, the packing industry and even feeding, everything is running on such a tight margin. They eliminate a lot of wasted energy with the formula trade and things like that. The guys know, it's all done, electronically now. That you put in how many cattle you're going to ship that week. They schedule the trucks are there, they show up, everything's just real seamless, and they don't want any hiccups in that. So you can see why they do it, but unfortunately, it just it is making it harder and harder and harder for small producers. And most of my beliefs that I preach on my soapbox are most of my beliefs are just whatever I think is good for a small producer, because we are losing them in droves. And, especially if somebody didn't grow up in it, or didn't have a ranch handed to them, or didn't have it made easier for them to buy or something like that. If they wanted to do it, it's almost impossible, and then that's very unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I hope that that trend reverses. I don't know what it'll take to get there.
Yeah.
And I definitely agree with you from the point of view that for somebody that wants to bootstrap an operation, first generation, and get into agriculture without a family background or without a lot of assets, if you're trying to get into the commodity production side, whether that's with cattle or crops, you're going to face a very difficult uphill battle against producers that are already scaled with depreciated assets and could afford some economies of scale. There's a lot more opportunity for small scale farming and doing things like my friend Roy Faltzgraf, like he grows 180 acres of some edible bean that he gets like an absurd premium for. Like find a premium crop that'll grow in your area instead of trying to compete with every other corn producer on the planet.
Right.
I mean, I I get that, there's a lot of places where if there's irrigation water, you can go into the farm service office, you go to your crop guy, and there's definitely a formula to how to grow corn in that soil. It's just you can't afford it. First generation farmers can't afford the land access, they can't afford the machinery, they can't afford the credit to buy everything they need to buy to operate for a year.
Right.
It's just too big of an ask. It's even kind of a big ask to do, anything on small scale, but small scale, multi-species, multi-crop, I think it's still possible to get into agriculture, just not
Oh,
necessarily.
there is.
into
And
the
then I've
commodity.
known guys that's, if you want to do the work, you've got to learn how to do the work first. So you're going to work for several different uh, other cattle people. Find one that you trust and build trust in them, and especially ones that don't have the next generation waiting or they're not interested. And you'll get opportunities, to partner up and, supply the labor, for an outfit, and they'll supply the capital or whatever. There's opportunities out there, but you've got to make relationships, which is pretty much the same in any kind of business. You've got to build the relationships and the trust. And if you do that, then opportunities will open up.
Yep, I couldn't agree. Couldn't agree more. Uh, we need to get going. I'll leave you with the last word.
Okay. Well, I appreciate this. We took us a little bit to get together here, but I think it worked out really good. And I appreciate what you do. And I think together we'll keep giving a forum to maybe push for small producers to have some victories here. And I think that's important. And nobody reads anymore. They listen to people like you and me.
Yeah, I have reading glasses that very rarely come out of the case because I can get all.
Well, they can listen to us going down the road to the next place,
Yeah,
to check the cows or whatever. Yeah.
great.
That's great.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time, Mr. Wall. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, guys. See you next week.